Hi, everyone, and welcome back to Introspection. I'm your host, Amy Lindner Lesser, and I want to say welcome, autumn. This is a time of lots changing. The leaves are changing on the trees, although right now, when I look out my window, I see trees that are losing leaves, and I'm waiting for the color. It's one of my favorite times of year because as Mother Earth goes through her metamorphosis, we too go through a little bit of shedding our leaves or our skin. It's a wonderful time to say, I have the chance to change what I wish to change. I can I can get rid of either habits or things that I do or thoughts that I believe that are either holding me back or are no longer serving me in some way. Welcome to Introspection, the podcast about moving from grief to growth. I'm Amy Lindner Lesser, your host. Introspection started out as a podcast about hospitality, innkeeping, and innkeepers. After about a year, I realized that my life and interests have morphed from hospitality to helping others navigate from grief and loss to growth and living. In this new version of Introspection, I will be talking about my personal experiences with loss, and there are quite a few, what I've learned along the way through my professional training, as well as from my coaching experiences. I'll also be bringing in guests to share interesting ideas. So grab a beverage, find a comfy place, take a deep breath, and listen in. So let me tell you a funny story, and thankfully, it's got a great ending. Yesterday, I decided to do something wild. For about 6 months, I've been talking with my hairdresser about putting in some teal-colored highlights in my hair. I thought it would be fun. It would be a change. And I love to change things up. I'm one of those people who feels like I'm sort of a prisoner in a box if I don't change things. And I figured hair, it grows back. It's not such a bad thing. Let me try it. Well, we did. And I can laugh about it now. She did a temporary teal coloring. And what happened was, because my hair is fairly blonde, it somehow turned out that the bottom part of my hair was almost Kelly green. And all I could do was look at myself and cry. I went over to see Maya, my younger daughter, and I said, "So what do you think?" And she looked at me and laughed. My 2.5-year-old granddaughter told me I looked like a witch. And that's sort of what I felt like. Thankfully, it's hair. And I went in today and we unchanged it. We brought it back to the original color. So my hair is now back to blonde and brown and gray and you name it, but almost no blue. There's a tiny bit, if you look really carefully, right in here. And I'm okay with that one. So, you can change things in your life and know that you can often change them back or change them again to something that you like better. I've been spending a lot of time. I think I've mentioned that I'm writing 2 chapters for 2 different books. One book is called Life Shifts, and that book is coming out on November 1st. And I'd love for you guys to be able to hear all the wonderful speakers and get copies and all kinds of gifts. So if you're interested, send me a DM on Facebook to amy.lindner.lesser, and I'll make sure to get you the link to join. Or you can email me at info@introspection.com, and I'll respond and send you the link there. The chapter that I wrote for the Life Shift book is about coming full circle. And I did a podcast when I was in Mexico and spoke about it. The chapter is a little bit more in depth and it's a lot better organized because I was writing it and not speaking off the top of my head. The chapter I'm writing now is for a book called The Grief Experience. And I think there are 23 authors in this book. And we're each writing about a different type of grief and from our own experiences, and then providing a tool to help the reader deal with that kind of grief. My chapter is going to be called The Alchemy of Grief. And if you know anything about me, you know that that makes so much sense. A few weeks ago, a friend of mine said to me, "You're the queen of silver linings." And I remember going, is that a compliment? Does she think I'm Pollyanna, that everything is wonderful? And then I realized that it really was a compliment. I'm not Pollyanna. There are things that are not wonderful. And what I try to do is I try to not be a victim, meaning my view on life is that things happen for me. I may not know why. I may not be happy about what has happened. And then what I do is I look to try to find what the lesson is that whatever you want to call the power larger than ourselves, whether it's God or the universe or Buddha or whatever, is trying to teach me in that. And I've worked very hard. One of the things that I've read in a book written by Bruce Feiler talks about lifequakes, and that's where I first heard the term of a lifequake. And that's a life transition, in my definition, that is on steroids. We all have life transitions. No matter what we do, we're going to go from one phase or one job or one relationship into another one. Those are all life transitions. It's when the transition hits you like a ton of bricks, and all of a sudden the coping mechanisms that you've had and how you've dealt with things over your past time don't work anymore. It's when all of a sudden you don't want to get up in the morning. You find yourself standing at the freezer eating a pint of ice cream right out of the container. It's when it's too much energy to clean your house or to put something away or to put the dirty dishes into the dishwasher and even take the clean dishes out of the dishwasher. It might be that you're so tired of being alone and you're feeling lonely, and yet the idea of having to be around other people and having to put on an act and behave in a certain way, or even just act human, is too much. That's a lifequake. I do believe, though, that once you get past the real difficult days, and that's a different amount of time for every single person, but once you get through that, what you find is you can go back and reflect on it and say, what are those positive things that have come out of that? What have I learned about me that I didn't know before? For example, when my husband Stephen passed away, I was 2 days shy of being 43. And I believe that he died. It was not necessarily that he willed himself to die when he did, but that he chose to not die on my birthday. And that's something that I'm very grateful for every single year on my birthday, is that I can grieve and I can deal with my sadness and my missing him. And then I can say, okay, now it's time to celebrate my birthday. he gave me that gift. That was a silver lining. Another silver lining from that was I learned how strong I really am. That I was left as a single parent, something I never wanted to do. And I was the sole proprietor of my inn, a 20-room bed and breakfast with, I think at the time there were 7 employees, and contractors and people I was dealing with all the time. And at first I didn't have the luxury to even think about it. I just had to put one foot in front of the other. And then the further I got into running the inn and running my life again, I realized, wow, I am strong. That it would have been nice to have him there. It would have been much nicer to have somebody else to rely on and to count on and to have a sounding board. And yet, it wasn't necessary. The things that Steve did were things that I could learn to do or I could hire people to do. And in some cases, I did one, some cases, I did the other, and sometimes I just did it all. I also learned I could live basically alone. I had 2 kids at home, but they were 11 and 14. And if you ask my daughters, they were completely mature enough to live on their own. They did a lot on their own, and that's the way they liked it. And I think that it created very strong, independent women. That's an idea of some of the silver linings or the gold linings of grief. And I hope that you'll get a copy of the book and read it and see how you too can find the alchemy in grief. So let's go back to the fall. Let's go back to autumn, where Mother Nature says, look at me. I'm producing these gorgeous, gorgeous colored leaves, the reds and the oranges and the yellows. And sometimes you're fortunate and there's a tree or multiple trees together, which is what there is in my neighborhood. There are 3 trees where the roots are almost in the same hole. And each tree is a different color. And when you look at them, it looks like one tree that's yellow, orange, and red. And look at the pumpkins turning from green slowly to spotted yellow, and then to yellow, and then to orange. The smell of the apples simmering to make applesauce or apple cider. The pumpkins that are sometimes carved, sometimes not. People seem to enjoy the change in the temperatures, that we're not getting those hot, humid, hazy days. I saw today on Facebook, somebody said, is this finally the end of the season where we complain about the bugs? In some ways, yes. They're all going to hibernate or to produce eggs that will sit and wait until next year before they hatch. I'm noticing that the birds that had been coming to my feeders are changing, that some of the birds that I had earlier on in the summer have already left for their migration. And maybe there'll be others coming south to upstate New York from Canada. It's a reminder, and a good reminder, that nothing stays the same. That's the one thing, other than death and taxes, the one thing that is a truism. It's always true. Things are always changing. And if we don't like it, I believe it was W.C. Fields who said, if you don't like the weather in Philadelphia, stay around, it'll be changed. And that's what life is. that life is constantly changing. Sometimes as we age, the change is slower, and sometimes it's faster. Sometimes when you look at a baby, they're changing daily. They're learning new things. Their eyes are opening for the first time. They're laughing for the first time. They're making funny sounds in their own language. And then all of a sudden, they're standing or they're crawling. And then they're standing. And then they're taking little steps. And then they're walking. And then they're running. And then they're jumping and skipping and hopping. And then they're carrying on conversations with you. That happens a lot faster with children than it does with adults. And yet it still happens to us. We are still both capable of change and we are still going to change. Sometimes the change is something that we can instigate or initiate, and other times the change sort of happens. And I still like to believe that it's happening for me. It's a benefit to me that it's changing. So on that, I want to leave you. I want to say happy autumn, happy October. I'm getting ready for my annual October retreat in Havre de Grace, Maryland. When this airs, I will be there enjoying maybe a little bit warmer weather down there, and some friends who I have been retreating with and masterminding with for many years. These are people who help me see new things, new ideas, and keep things fresh. That's where I got the name Introspection from, were people at that retreat. I also want to wish myself a happy 3-year. Is it 3? No, 2-year. Nope, it is 3-year. See? A happy 3-year podcast anniversary. I started this podcast 3 years ago, and that doesn't sound right. It has to be 2. It's 2. I think one of the things that's changed is my ability to count, although arithmetic was never a strong suit. Math was, but not arithmetic. So thank you for watching or listening to the podcast. As always, I would love to hear your suggestions on who to have on. I've been picking people to talk about things that are related to grief and death and loss, and who also have a positive outlook on them. And sometimes you might be thinking, where did she get an idea to do that? They're things that interest me. I would love to hear what interests you and what ideas you have for the podcast. So please email me or DM me on Facebook and let me know. And if you like the podcast, share it with friends. We would always love to have the podcast grow in its viewer and listenership. Thanks a lot. Happy autumn. Remember, I love you. Take care. Bye-bye. If you liked what you heard on this podcast and want to hear more, please follow us and tell your friends. You can also find me on Facebook at Amy Lindner Lesser, Grief to Growth Life Coaching, and on LinkedIn at Amy Lindner Lesser.